The envelope looked ordinary, white, thin, just another piece of mail mixed in with grocery coupons and a credit card offer I didn't ask for. If I had known what was inside it, I might have let it sit on the counter a little longer, maybe a few hours, maybe a few days, because once I opened it, everything about my marriage changed. I was standing at the kitchen sink when I tore it open, water running, dishes half washed, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. My husband, Darnell, had already left for work, the same routine we'd had for years. He leaves early, I clean up the kitchen, life moves quietly. At least that's how it looked from the outside. But inside this house, silence wasn't peace, it was survival. I learned that slowly, one comment at a time. Why you always talking like that in front of people? You know you embarrass me sometimes, right? Maybe if you listened more and talked less, folks would respect you. Little cuts. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just enough to make you question yourself. After a while, I stopped arguing, stopped explaining, stopped defending myself. Peace became easier than truth. That's how invisibility starts. Not all at once, just little pieces of yourself disappearing until one day you realize you barely speak anymore. That morning felt like every other morning until I pulled the letter out of the envelope. The logo at the top read Horizon Life Assurance. I frowned. I didn't recognize the name. At first, I thought it was a marketing letter, but the paper felt official, heavy, structured, the kind of letter companies send when they're talking about money. My eyes moved down the page. Policy confirmation statement. I paused. Policy? What policy? I kept reading. Dear Mrs. Elaine Brooks. That part was normal. Elaine Brooks, my married name, the name I'd been answering to for 15 years. But the next line made my stomach twist. This letter confirms your active life insurance policy with Horizon Life Assurance effective since March 3rd, 2 years prior. My fingers tightened around the paper. Life insurance? My life insurance? That didn't make sense. I had never applied for life insurance, never discussed it, never signed anything. Darnell handled most of the finances in our house. Bills, investments, taxes. He liked reminding me of that too. You ain't got to worry about none of that stuff. I got it. At the time, I thought he was being responsible, protective. Now that sentence sounded different in my head. I sat down at the kitchen table and read the letter again and again. The words didn't change. Policy active, coverage confirmed, beneficiary listed. My chest started tightening because the next line said something that made the room feel smaller. Primary beneficiary, Darnell Brooks, my husband. The air felt thick, like someone closed all the windows without telling me. I kept reading. Coverage amount, $850,000. $850,000? For a moment, I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because it felt ridiculous, like a mistake. There had to be a mistake. Maybe they sent it to the wrong person. Maybe it was some kind of marketing thing. No. The policy number was real. My address was correct. My name was printed in bold letters. I flipped the page over, looking for something that explained it. There wasn't anything, just instructions. If you have questions regarding your policy, please contact your Horizon representative. Questions? I had one big question. How do you have life insurance you never signed up for? I stared at the phone sitting on the table. Part of me didn't want to call, because calling meant this might actually be real. But the other part of me, the part that had been quiet for years, needed to know. So I dialed the number at the bottom of the page. It rang twice. A woman answered. Thank you for calling Horizon Life Assurance. How may I assist you today? My voice sounded small. Hi, I'm calling about a policy confirmation letter I received. Of course, she said politely. May I have your policy number? I read it off the page. There was a pause while she typed. Then she said something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Yes, Mrs. Brooks, I see your account here. Your life insurance policy has been active for a little over 2 years now. 2 years? My throat went dry. I think there might be a mistake, I said. Oh? I never signed up for life insurance. The woman paused. Not a long pause, but long enough for my heart to start beating harder. Well, she said carefully, according to our records, the application was completed online and verified with signed documentation. Signed documentation? My fingers started going numb. What kind of documentation? I asked. She clicked something on her computer. I see a digital application, identity verification, and a signed authorization form. Signed authorization forms? All under my name? But I never signed anything. Ma'am, she asked gently, are you still there? Yes. My voice barely came out. Would you like me to email you copies of the application documents? For a moment, I couldn't speak because something deep in my chest had started whispering a thought I didn't want to believe, a thought that made the room feel colder. Yes, I finally said, I would. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the letter. Life insurance, $850,000. Beneficiary, my husband, and paperwork that apparently carried my name, my signature, but not my permission. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Email notification. Subject line, policy application documents attached. My hand shook as I opened the file, and when I saw the signature at the bottom of the page, my heart dropped into my stomach because it looked like my name, but I knew one thing for certain. I had never signed it. I stared at the screen for a long time before I scrolled. The email sat open on my laptop, the attachment already downloaded, the document glowing against the quiet morning light coming through the kitchen window. My name was at the top of the form, Elaine Brooks, policyholder. Below that were pages of personal details, my birth date, my social security number, our home address, even my employer. All correct, all accurate. Whoever filled out that application knew my information well enough that nothing looked out of place. That was the first thing that made my chest tighten. The second thing was the signature. It sat at the bottom of the final page, curved, looped, confident. It looked almost exactly like mine. Almost. But something about it felt wrong. The loops were too wide. The angle was off. My name was there, but the handwriting didn't carry my rhythm. When you sign your name for years, your hand learns the motion like muscle memory. Even without thinking, you know what it should feel like. And this one felt like someone had studied my signature, then practiced it. My heart started beating harder in my chest. I grabbed the legal pad that sat on the table and wrote my name 3 times. Elaine Brooks. Again, Elaine Brooks. Then again. The difference was obvious. Mine leaned slightly forward. Theirs leaned back. Mine was quick. Theirs was careful. Theirs was a copy. My stomach twisted, because now the question wasn't whether the signature was real. The question was who would have access to everything needed to fake it. Who knew my social security number, my employer, my address, my birthday? The answer sat quietly in my head. My husband. I leaned back in the chair slowly, the wood creaking under my weight. The house felt different now. The same walls, the same kitchen table, the same coffee mug sitting half empty beside my laptop, but the air had changed, like someone had opened a door to a room I didn't know existed. For 15 years, Darnell handled most of the financial decisions. At first, it felt like teamwork. He liked numbers, I didn't. He enjoyed talking about investments, insurance, tax strategies. I preferred focusing on my job and keeping our life running smoothly. It seemed like a fair balance. At least that's what I told myself. Looking back now, I realized how often he had dismissed my questions. You don't need to worry about that. It's just paperwork.
I already handled it. At the time, I thought he was saving me stress. Now, those same words sounded like something else. Control. I scrolled further down the application. One section caught my attention. Policy initiation date, March 3rd, 2 years prior. March 3rd. That date stirred something in the back of my mind. I closed my eyes and tried to remember. What happened around that time? 2 years ago. Then it came back to me. That was the same week Darnell came home excited about some kind of investment. He had been pacing the living room with his phone pressed to his ear, talking fast, laughing. When he hung up, he told me he had just made a big move, something about a business opportunity, real estate, a partner. He didn't explain much. When I asked questions, he waved his hand like he always did. Just trust me, it's handled. Handled. I remember feeling uneasy that night, but I pushed the feeling down. Peace was easier than confrontation. That's what marriage had become for me. Avoiding conflict, swallowing discomfort, choosing quiet. But now the timing felt different. March 3rd, the exact day that life insurance policy started. I scrolled back up to the coverage amount again, $850,000. The number stared at me from the screen like it had something to say. My hands went cold, because suddenly the policy didn't feel random anymore. It felt connected to something I didn't understand yet. The phone rang suddenly, breaking the silence in the kitchen. I jumped. It was just my coworker, Angela. "Girl, you on your way to work?" she asked. I glanced at the clock. I hadn't even noticed the time. "No," I said quietly. "I think I'm going to take a personal day." She laughed lightly. "Must be nice." I tried to laugh back, but my voice didn't cooperate. After we hung up, I returned my attention to the documents. The application included a section labeled Health Declaration. I scanned the answers, all marked no. No heart conditions, no chronic illness, no major medical history. It painted a picture of someone healthy, predictable, insurable, someone worth nearly $1 million to an insurance company. Then I saw another line that made my skin prickle. Application submitted by Authorized Household Representative. Authorized Household Representative. My chest tightened because I already knew who that meant. Darnell. The form didn't list his name in that section, but it didn't have to. He was the only other person with access to our home computer, the only person who knew all my information, the only person who would have reason to complete something like this without telling me. I closed the laptop slowly. My reflection stared back at me in the dark screen. For years, I'd convinced myself that keeping quiet was the safest way to live, that silence preserved peace. But sitting there in my quiet kitchen, staring at evidence that someone had forged my signature on a policy worth $850,000, I realized something for the first time. Silence doesn't always protect you. Sometimes, silence just makes it easier for someone else to act without you noticing. I looked back at the envelope on the table. Horizon Life Assurance. If that letter had never arrived, I might never have known this policy existed, which means there's only one reason I know about it now. Something in the system had changed. Something had triggered the company to send me confirmation. And if that was true, then whatever Darnell had been trying to keep hidden might already be starting to unravel. I didn't go to work that day. I tried to convince myself I could. I even stood in the bedroom for a few minutes with my blouse halfway buttoned, staring at my reflection in the mirror like everything was normal. But nothing about that morning felt normal anymore. The laptop was still open on the kitchen table, the insurance documents glowing quietly on the screen like they were waiting for me to come back. I unbuttoned the blouse and changed back into my house clothes, because pretending I could focus on spreadsheets and meetings while an $850,000 life insurance policy with my forged signature sat in my kitchen felt ridiculous. Instead, I made another cup of coffee and sat down again. The house felt too quiet. Usually that quiet meant peace. That morning, it felt like a warning. I opened the email again, scrolled slowly through every page of the application, looking for something, anything that might explain how this happened. Most of it looked ordinary. Personal information, medical questions, identity verification. But near the end of the document, there was another section I hadn't noticed before. Beneficiary confirmation. The name listed there made my chest tighten again. Darnell Brooks, 100% beneficiary. There were no secondary beneficiaries, no children listed, no backup. If something happened to me, every dollar went directly to him. My stomach twisted, because the more I looked at the document, the more intentional it felt. Not rushed, not sloppy, carefully completed. Whoever submitted it knew exactly what they were doing. I noticed something else, too. The application timestamp, submitted March 3rd, 11:42 p.m. Almost midnight. That detail bothered me more than I expected. Darnell and I were home together that night. I remembered it now. We were sitting in the living room watching television. He had his laptop open, typing occasionally. I asked him what he was working on. He said it was business paperwork. I remember nodding and turning my attention back to the television. I never asked another question. My chest tightened at the memory, because now I could picture it clearly. He wasn't doing business paperwork. He was filling out a life insurance application in my name. My fingers pressed against the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. My brain kept trying to find another explanation. Maybe it was some kind of financial planning thing. Maybe he thought he was protecting our future. Maybe... But then another thought slid into my mind. If that was true, why hide it from me? Why forge my signature? Why never mention it? People don't hide things that are meant to protect you. They hide things that benefit them. My phone buzzed again. Another email from Horizon Life Assurance. Subject, document request confirmation. I opened it quickly. Inside was a short message confirming that my request for policy documentation had been processed. But there was another line that made my stomach drop. Please note that any dispute regarding policy authorization may require a formal review by our fraud investigation department. Fraud. The words sat there on the screen like it was heavier than the rest of the sentence. Fraud meant someone had committed a crime. Fraud meant this wasn't just a misunderstanding, and if Horizon decided to investigate, they would start asking questions about signatures, about applications, about who submitted the policy, questions that could easily lead back to my husband. The thought made my chest tighten, because suddenly this situation wasn't just about our marriage anymore. It could turn into something legal, something public, something bigger than the quiet life we'd built together. I rubbed my forehead and leaned back in the chair. For 15 years, I had trained myself not to make waves, not to create problems, not to embarrass my husband. But sitting there now, staring at a document that placed nearly $1 million on my life without my knowledge, I realized how dangerous that silence had become. Another detail caught my eye. At the very bottom of the application, there was a small box labeled Agent Reference. I hadn't noticed it before. Next to it was a name, Samuel Ortega, licensed insurance agent. There was also a phone number, which meant the policy hadn't just been submitted online. It had been processed through an agent, someone who helped finalize it, someone who might remember the details. My heart started beating faster, because that meant there was someone else who knew how this policy was created, someone who could explain whether my husband had applied alone or if something else had happened. I grabbed my phone again and stared at the number. For a moment, I hesitated. Calling meant stepping further into something I might not be able to step back from. Once I started asking questions, answers would follow, and those answers might change everything about the life I thought I had. I looked around the kitchen, the house Darnell and I bought together, the quiet space where I had spent years trying to keep peace, and I realized something that made my chest feel both heavier and lighter at the same time. Peace that depends on silence isn't peace at all. It's just fear wearing a friendly mask. I dialed the number. It rang twice. Then a man answered. Horizon Insurance Services? My voice felt steadier than I expected. Hi, my name is Elaine Brooks. There was a pause. Yes, Mrs. Brooks, how can I help you? I took a slow breath. I'm calling about a life insurance policy that was opened in my name. There was another pause, this one longer. Then he said something that made my heart begin to pound in my chest. Oh, yes, I remember that policy.
The moment he said he remembered the policy, my chest tightened. Because suddenly this wasn't just paperwork. It was real. There was a person on the other end of the phone who had been involved in the process. A real human being who might know how something this serious had happened without me knowing. Yes, the man continued slowly. Mrs. Brooks, I remember working on that file. My fingers curled around the edge of the table. Can you explain how the policy was approved? I asked. There was a soft tapping sound, like he was pulling up information on his computer. Well, he said carefully, the application came through our online system, but I assisted with final verification. Verification? I repeated. Yes, a short follow-up call to confirm the details before activation. My heart skipped. A phone call? That's correct. My mind started racing. I never spoke to anyone from your company, I said quietly. Silence filled the line. Then he cleared his throat. According to my notes, the call was completed successfully. Who did you speak to? I asked. Another pause, longer this time. Well, he said slowly, the caller identified themselves as you. The room felt suddenly smaller, like the walls had moved closer. But you verified identity, I asked. Yes, he said, standard confirmation questions. My stomach twisted. Such as? Date of birth, address, employer, last 4 digits of Social Security. All information Darnell knew. My throat felt dry. And the voice? I asked. What about it? Did you recognize anything unusual about it? He hesitated. Then he said something that made my chest tighten even more. It didn't mean I had any reason to suspect anything at the time. At the time, those words hung in the air, which meant now? Now he might be thinking differently. I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Ortega, I said carefully. I never applied for this policy. The line went completely quiet. For a moment, I wondered if the call had dropped. Then I heard him exhale slowly. That's concerning. Concern was a polite word. My mind had already moved past concern. Do you still have records of that call? I asked. Yes, we log all agent notes and verification details. Would you be able to send those to me? He hesitated again. I would need to check with our compliance department. I understand. He typed something else, then said something that made my stomach drop even further. There's one more detail in the file that might interest you. I straightened in my chair. What detail? He said. The policy was approved unusually quickly. How quickly? Less than 48 hours after submission. That didn't sound normal. Is that unusual? I asked. Very. My fingers tightened around the phone. Why? He paused before answering. Most policies that large require additional underwriting, medical exams, financial reviews.
And mine didn't? No, he said quietly. It was marked as a priority application. Priority? That word sent a chill down my spine. Who marked it that way? I asked. Another pause, then the sound of more typing. Well, according to the file, the request came from the financial partner listed on the application. My stomach twisted again. Financial partner? Yes, someone connected to the investment portfolio referenced in the policy. Investment? My mind flashed back to that night 2 years ago. Darnell pacing the living room, talking excitedly about a business opportunity, real estate, partners, a big move. What was the name of that partner? I asked. He scrolled again. Give me a moment. I held my breath. Then he said the name, and the moment he did, something inside my chest went cold, because I had heard that name before. Darnell mentioned it once, just once, on a phone call late at night. He stepped outside to take it. When he came back inside, he looked nervous. When I asked who it was, he brushed it off. Just business stuff. But the name stuck in my memory because it sounded expensive, professional, like someone involved in big deals. Now it was showing up in an insurance file connected to a policy I never signed. Mrs. Brooks? The agent asked gently. Yes. If you're saying you never authorized this policy, then this situation may require formal review. I understand. Insurance fraud investigations can be complicated. Complicated. Words sent a chill down my spine. Complicated how? I asked. Well, he said carefully, if the application contains forged documentation, the company would need to determine who submitted it. My heart pounded harder. And if they find out? I asked. They would likely involve legal authorities. Legal authorities. The words echoed in my head. Because suddenly this situation wasn't just about deception, it was about something much bigger. A crime. I stared at the documents on my table again. My name, my signature, my life insured for nearly $1 million, but approved under circumstances that now sounded suspicious even to the insurance agent who processed it. Mr. Ortega, I said slowly. Yes? There's something else I need to know. Go ahead. I took a breath. When that verification call happened 2 years ago, do you remember what time it was? More typing. Then he answered. According to my notes, it was just after 10 p.m. My stomach dropped because I remembered exactly where I was at 10 p.m. that night. I was asleep in the bedroom while my husband sat in the living room with his laptop, talking quietly on the phone. After I hung up the phone, the house felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just heavier, like the air itself was carrying information I had never noticed before. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the papers spread out in front of me. The policy confirmation, the application documents, my name printed neatly across every page, Elaine Brooks, policyholder. The identity felt strange now because the woman described in those documents had agreed to something I had never even heard about, a life insurance policy worth $850,000, activated 2 years ago, approved after a phone call that supposedly came from me. But I knew exactly where I was that night, asleep, while someone else spoke on the phone using my identity. My chest tightened at the thought, because there was only one person in that house with me that night, Darnell. I tried to force myself to think logically, to slow down. Jumping to conclusions wouldn't help, but the pieces were starting to line up whether I wanted them to or not. My information, my social security number, my employer, the address, my signature, all of it required access to things only someone close to me would have, someone who shared my home, someone who handled most of our finances, someone who constantly reminded me not to worry about paperwork.
I pushed my chair back and stood up. The kitchen suddenly felt too small. I walked slowly through the house, past the living room where Darnell liked to sit with his laptop every night, past the hallway that led to our bedroom, past the office we barely used. Every room held a memory. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of believing we were building a life together. But standing there now, something else occurred to me. What if the life we built had never been as balanced as I thought? What if he had been making decisions for both of us for years without telling me? The thought made my stomach twist. I walked back to the kitchen and opened the laptop again. If this situation was bigger than one policy, I needed to understand everything connected to it. The application mentioned an investment portfolio, a financial partner, something that had triggered the policy to be approved quickly, which meant the insurance wasn't random. It was tied to something Darnell had never explained. I opened our joint bank account. At least, the account I believed was our main account. Scrolling through 2 years of transactions felt like flipping through a diary written in numbers. Groceries, mortgage, utilities. Nothing unusual. Then something caught my eye. A transfer. Large. Very large. $200,000. The date was the same week the life insurance policy started. My pulse quickened. I clicked the transaction. The money had been transferred out of the account to something labeled B&H Capital Holdings. I stared at the name. I had never heard of it before. Not once. Not in 15 years of marriage. But $200,000 had left our account and gone there. My stomach tightened again, because that money hadn't just been Darnell's. Half of it was mine. Money we had saved together over years. Money I thought was sitting safely in our accounts. And yet here it was, moved quietly, 2 years ago, right when the life insurance policy was created. My hands started shaking slightly, because suddenly the timing felt too exact to ignore. March 3rd, investment transfer, life insurance policy activation, verification phone call, all within the same 48 hours. It didn't feel like coincidence anymore. It felt planned. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Darnell. "Everything okay? You didn't leave for work." I stared at the screen. The casual tone of the message made my chest tighten, because right now he was probably sitting in his office somewhere, thinking everything in his life is exactly the same, thinking I was still the quiet wife who didn't ask questions about money, thinking I didn't know anything about the policy, or the transfer, or the fake signature. For a moment, I imagined confronting him right away, walking into the room tonight and placing the documents on the table, demanding an explanation. But something stopped me. A quiet voice in the back of my mind, the same voice that had finally spoken up when the insurance letter arrived. If someone is capable of forging your name on an $850,000 life insurance policy, you don't confront them without understanding the full story. I looked back at the bank transfer again. B&H Capital Holdings, $200,000. That name sounded like a company, which meant there would be records, public ones. I opened a new browser tab and typed the name into the search bar. The results appeared almost instantly. My breath caught, because the company existed, and when I clicked the first result, a business registration page opened, listing the company details, location, incorporation date, ownership. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the names listed under directors. And the moment I saw the first one, my heart began pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, because one of the directors listed for B&H Capital Holdings was my husband. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. Darnell Brooks, listed clearly under directors. There was no mistaking it. The business registration page showed the company details in clean official rows: address, incorporation date, registration number. But my eyes kept drifting back to the name I recognized most: my husband. The room felt strangely quiet again. I realized I had stopped breathing for a moment and forced myself to inhale slowly. So the company was real. The transfer of $200,000 hadn't been an error or a random investment. It had gone into a business my husband was connected to. And the timing? The same week as the life insurance policy. My fingers hovered over the trackpad as I scrolled further down the page. Another name appeared under Directors, the same name the insurance agent had mentioned earlier, the financial partner. My stomach twisted, because now the connection was clear. The insurance policy hadn't appeared out of nowhere. It had been created right alongside this investment, almost like it was part of the same plan. I leaned back in the chair slowly. For years, Darnell had made financial decisions for us. I trusted him, not because I was careless, but because that's what marriage is supposed to mean. You divide responsibilities. He handled numbers, I handled other things. At least that's how we described it. But sitting there now, something else became obvious. Handling finances had also meant controlling information. If he moved money, I didn't know. If he signed documents, I didn't know. If he opened accounts, I didn't know. And apparently, if he took out life insurance on me, I didn't know that either. The thought made my chest tighten, but it also did something unexpected. It cleared my head. For the first time that morning, the panic started to fade. Instead of fear, a different feeling took its place. Focus. Because the more information I gathered, the clearer the situation became. I clicked through the rest of the business page. There was an address listed for B&H Capital Holdings, a small office building downtown. Nothing flashy, but real. Very real. I grabbed the legal pad again and wrote down everything: company name, registration number, address, names of the directors. The same careful handwriting I used earlier, my pen moving faster now, because this wasn't just about my marriage anymore. It was about evidence. Another detail caught my attention. The company had been incorporated just 3 days before the insurance policy started. 3 days. I stared at that number. The timeline was almost too neat. Company created, money transferred, life insurance policy activated, verification call made, all in the span of 1 week. That wasn't coincidence. That was coordination. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Darnell. "You okay? Haven't heard back." I looked at the screen for a long moment before typing. Just taking a day off, feeling tired. 3 little dots appeared immediately, then his reply: "Get some rest." Simple, casual, like nothing in the world had changed. I set the phone down slowly, because right now he still believed I didn't know anything, and for the moment, that worked in my favor. I looked back at the laptop screen. There were still pieces missing. The company existed, the investment was real, the life insurance policy had been created around the same time, but there was still one question that kept circling in my mind. Why? Why insure my life for nearly $1 million right when a business investment was made? Insurance companies don't issue large policies randomly. They require financial justification, which meant someone had explained why my life needed that level of coverage. Someone had convinced the company that the policy made sense. My stomach tightened again, because the explanation could only be one of 2 things. Either the insurance was meant to protect the investment, or something else was happening, something I didn't understand yet. I opened the policy document again and scrolled slowly through the pages. This time, I paid attention to a section I had skimmed earlier. Purpose of coverage. There was a paragraph filled with financial language, but one phrase jumped out at me. Key person. Key person? I read the sentence again. The policy had been categorized as protection for a key individual whose loss could financially impact associated business operations. My chest tightened because suddenly the policy made a different kind of sense. If something happened to me, the payout could protect the investment, cover financial losses, stabilize the company. At least that's the official explanation. But another thought slipped quietly into my mind, a darker one. If someone wanted access to nearly $1 million, the easiest way would be through a life insurance policy. I pushed the thought away immediately. It felt too extreme, too frightening, but the discomfort lingered because when I looked at the timeline again, the company, the investment, the policy, the forged signature, the late-night phone call pretending to be me, it didn't feel accidental. It felt calculated. And that's when I realized something that made my stomach turn. If I hadn't received that letter yesterday, I might never have known any of this existed. Which means one thing. For 2 full years, a life insurance policy worth $850,000 had been sitting quietly in the background of my life. A policy I never agreed to. A policy my husband benefited from. And the only reason I knew about it now was because the insurance company had decided to send a routine confirmation letter, a simple administrative update, the kind of letter most people barely glance at before throwing away. I looked down at the envelope still sitting on the table, plain, unremarkable, almost forgettable. And suddenly, I realized how close I had come to missing it entirely, how easy it would have been to throw it out with the junk mail. If that had happened, I would still be living inside a story I didn't understand, still trusting a man who had forged my name, still believing our finances were shared, still unaware that nearly $1 million had been placed on my life. And the most unsettling part, Darnell had never intended for me to know it, which meant somewhere inside his plan, this letter was never supposed to arrive. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I stopped protecting him. Not out loud, not with a confrontation, but inside my own mind. For 15 years, every uncomfortable feeling I had about our marriage came with an explanation. Darnell's temper? Stress. His criticism? Just honesty. His control over the finances? Responsibility. I had always found ways to make his behavior sound reasonable. That was the quiet agreement I made with myself to keep peace. But sitting there at the kitchen table with proof of a forged signature and a life insurance policy I never approved, something shifted. The explanation stopped working, because you can explain a lot of things in a marriage, but you cannot explain why someone would sign your name on an $850,000 life insurance policy without telling you. I looked down at the legal pad again. The list of notes had grown longer. Life insurance policy, $850,000. Beneficiary, Darnell Brooks. Policy start date, March 3rd. Verification call, 10 p.m. Investment transfer, $200,000. B&H Capital Holdings. Directors, Darnell Brooks plus partner. Seeing everything written out in one place made my stomach tighten again. This wasn't one strange decision, it was a pattern, pieces of a structure I had never seen before. I opened the browser again and returned to the company registration page. This time, I clicked through every detail I could find: corporate filings, financial summaries, public disclosures. Most of it was technical and dull, but one document caught my attention: an investment disclosure statement. The file opened slowly, revealing several pages of dense financial language. I skimmed until I found the section listing the initial capital contributors. 2 names appeared. The first was Darnell. The second was the partner, but below that was a third line. Associated Financial Protection, Key Person Insurance Policy. My chest tightened. That phrase again. I kept reading. According to the document, the life insurance policy existed to protect the company's initial investment. If the key individual died, the policy would pay out funds that could stabilize the business and protect the financial partners. But something about the description felt strange, because the key individual wasn't Darnell. It was me. My name was listed clearly in the paragraph. Elaine Brooks. The document described me as a financial asset connected to the investment. I leaned back slowly. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. A financial asset. That was the phrase they used. Not partner, not investor, asset. Like I was something the company owned or depended on. My chest tightened because I had never invested in this company. Not intentionally, but my name was connected to it. My identity, my life, my insurance policy, all linked to an investment I didn't know existed. The realization made something inside me go still, because suddenly the purpose of the insurance policy felt different. This wasn't just about money, it was about protection. Protection for the business, protection for the investors, protection for everyone involved in that company. Everyone except me. I stood up from the table and walked slowly through the house again. The quiet felt heavier now, almost like the walls were listening. I stopped in the living room and looked at the couch where Darnell usually sat at night, laptop open, phone in his hand, talking about deals and investments. I used to watch him from the kitchen sometimes, thinking how confident he looked, how sure he was about the future. I used to admire that. Now I wondered how many of those conversations were connected to things I never knew about. My phone buzzed again. Another message from him. Heading home soon? Want me to grab dinner? I stared at the screen for a long moment. The question felt normal, almost loving, but now I saw something else hiding inside it. Routine, control, predictability. He believed our life was still exactly the same. He believed I was still the quiet wife who avoided conflict, the woman who wouldn't question a financial decision, the woman who trusted him completely. For a moment, I imagined what his face would look like if he knew what I had discovered today. The policy, the forged signature, the company, the investment, the insurance classification listing me as a key individual. But that moment would come later. Right now, I needed more information, because one detail in the investment document still bothered me, the phrase Associated Financial Protection. It suggested that the insurance policy wasn't just a personal decision, it was part of the company's financial structure, which meant someone had approved it, someone had reviewed the documentation, someone had verified that everything was legitimate, someone who might have seen my signature, someone who might know exactly who submitted the application. I returned to the kitchen table and opened the document again, scrolling carefully this time. Near the bottom of the page was a section listing the company's legal advisors. There were 2 names, a law firm and a financial compliance consultant. The consultant's name was listed with a contact number. I wrote it down on my legal pad, because if the insurance policy was part of the company's official investment protection plan, then that consultant might know exactly how it was approved, which meant they might know who authorized it. I stared at the number for a long moment. The house was still quiet. Darnell would be home in less than 2 hours. For years I had lived in silence to keep peace, but now silence felt dangerous. Not peaceful, dangerous. I picked up the phone and dialed the number. It rang once, then twice. Finally, a man answered. "Hello, Financial Compliance Services? This is Victor Lang speaking." My voice felt calm now, stronger than it had been that morning. "Hello, Mr. Lang," I said. "My name is Elaine Brooks.
There was a brief pause. Yes? I'm calling about an investment company called B&H Capital Holdings. Another pause, longer this time. Then he said something that made my heart begin to pound again. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. The moment he said he wasn't expecting to hear from me, my heart skipped. Because that sentence carried a meaning that felt heavier than the words themselves. Not expecting, which meant he knew who I was before I even explained anything. I'm sorry, I said carefully. He said, I wasn't expecting to hear from you, Victor Lang repeated. His tone wasn't rude, but it wasn't relaxed either. It sounded cautious, like someone who suddenly realized a conversation had started earlier than it should have. You know who I am? I asked. There was a pause on the line. Then he answered slowly. Yes, your name is listed in the company's investment protection file. My stomach tightened. Investment protection, the same phrase from the documents. I see, I said quietly. He continued, you're associated with the key person insurance policy. Associated, not owner, not applicant, associated. The wording felt strangely distant, like I was part of the paperwork, but not the decision. I'm calling because I recently discovered that policy, I said. Another pause, longer than the last one. Then he asked a question that made my skin prickle. You only just discovered it? Yes. More silence. Then he exhaled slowly. Well, that complicates things. Complicates? That word hung in the air. Why would it complicate things? I asked. His answer came carefully. Because the documentation we reviewed indicated that you were aware of the policy. My fingers tightened around the phone. I was not. Another pause, long enough for me to hear faint sounds of typing in the background. When he spoke again, his voice sounded different, more serious. I need to ask you something directly, Mrs. Brooks. Okay? Did you personally sign the policy authorization form? No. The word came out stronger than I expected. Firm. Certain. Because there was no doubt about that. He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice had shifted again. Quieter. That's concerning. I almost laughed. The insurance agent had said the same thing earlier. Concern. Such a polite word for something that felt far more disturbing. What exactly did the company believe? I asked. That the insurance was requested as part of the investment protection structure. And who explained that? I asked. Another pause. The primary investor, he said. Primary investor. My mind immediately pictured Darnell. What did he say? I asked. Victor hesitated, then answered. He explained that you were aware of the insurance and that it had been agreed upon privately. Agreed upon privately. My stomach twisted, because that phrase sounded exactly like something Darnell would say. Calm, confident, convincing. The kind of explanation people accept without questioning. But now the truth sat between us on the phone. I had never agreed to anything. I see, I said slowly. Victor cleared his throat. There's something else you should know. My heart began to beat faster again. What? The insurance policy wasn't just linked to the investment. I felt my shoulders tense. What do you mean? It was also used as part of the company's financing structure. Financing? My mind struggled to catch up. How? The policy was listed as a financial safeguard when the company applied for additional funding. The room felt colder because suddenly the policy had a second purpose: protection for investors and leverage for funding. How much funding? I asked, more typing on his end. Approximately $1.2 million. My breath caught. The number echoed in my head. 1.2 million. That funding was approved largely because the investment was considered protected by your policy, he continued. My policy, my forged signature, my life, all used to secure over $1 million in funding for a company I had never even heard of. My chest tightened again because suddenly the situation felt much bigger than I had realized. This wasn't just about one insurance policy. It was about a business deal, a financial structure, an investment strategy built partly on the assumption that my life had a price attached to it, and that everyone involved believed I had agreed to it. "Mr. Lang," I said quietly. "Yes?" If the policy authorization wasn't legitimate, then what happens to the investment? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice sounded careful. That would create a significant legal problem for the company, for the investors, and for the person who submitted the policy. Would the insurance company investigate? Yes. And the lenders? Almost certainly. My heart pounded harder because now I understood something important. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a structure, a financial system built around something that might not be real. And if that system collapsed, it wouldn't just affect me and Darnell, it would affect the entire investment, which meant there were people, banks, investors, partners who believed everything about that policy was legitimate, but it wasn't. My phone buzzed in my other hand. Another message from Darnell. "I'm on my way home." The words made my chest tighten because suddenly I realized something that made my stomach twist. For 2 years, Darnell had been living comfortably inside this arrangement. A life insurance policy in my name, a business funded partly by that policy, investors and lenders believing the structure was secure, and all of it depended on one thing: me staying silent. Not noticing, not asking questions, not opening that letter when it arrived. Victor spoke again. "There's something I need to clarify with you, Mrs. Brooks." "What is it?" "If you're saying the authorization was forged, then someone intentionally misrepresented your involvement in the investment." "Yes," I said quietly. Another pause. Then he said something that made my heart beat even faster. "In that case, the entire funding structure may have been built on false information." For a moment after Victor said that, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us like something fragile. Because once words like false information enter a conversation about money, things stop being simple. They become legal, complicated, dangerous. My fingers tightened around the phone. "So what happens now?" I asked. Victor exhaled slowly. "Well, that depends on what you choose to do." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "If you formally dispute the insurance policy, Horizon Life Assurance will open a fraud investigation." I already knew that part. The insurance agent had hinted at it earlier. "But that's only the beginning," Victor continued. "How so?" "Because the moment the policy's legitimacy is questioned, the lenders financing B&H Capital Holdings will also review the investment structure." My chest tightened. "And if they find problems, they will likely freeze funding and launch their own investigation." Freeze funding? Investigation. The words echoed in my mind, because that meant the consequences wouldn't stay inside my marriage. They would spread outward, to the company, to the investors, to everyone who had money tied up in the deal. I looked down at the legal pad again. The notes I had written earlier suddenly felt heavier. Life insurance, $850,000. Investment transfer, $200,000. Company funding, $1.2 million. All of it connected, all of it dependent on the assumption that I had willingly agreed to the policy, but I hadn't, which meant one small decision, one phone call, could unravel everything. Victor spoke again. "There's something else you should consider." "What's that?"
If the policy authorization was forged, the person who submitted it could face criminal charges. Criminal. The word hit me harder than I expected, because even though I'd spent the entire day uncovering evidence that pointed toward my husband, hearing the situation described that way still made my chest ache. For 15 years, Darnell wasn't just my husband, he was my partner, my routine, my everyday life. We built habits together, memories, inside jokes. Even our arguments had become predictable over time. And now the story I thought we were living inside felt like it had been quietly rewritten without me noticing. Victor cleared his throat. Mrs. Brooks? Yes. I want to be very clear about something. Okay, you are not responsible for any of this. His tone had shifted again, gentler now, professional but reassuring. If the documents were forged, then the responsibility lies with the person who submitted them. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I understand. And you have every right to dispute the policy. I stared at the kitchen window while he spoke. Outside, the late afternoon sun had started dropping lower in the sky. Cars passed quietly on the street, neighbors walked their dogs. The world kept moving like nothing unusual had happened. But inside my house, everything felt different. Mr. Lang, I said slowly. Yes? If the insurance company investigates, how long does that usually take? Several weeks, sometimes longer. Weeks. That meant this situation wouldn't explode overnight. It would unfold slowly, piece by piece, which gave me something I hadn't had all day. Time. Time to think. Time to understand. Time to decide how I wanted to handle what came next. I appreciate your honesty. You're welcome. Before ending the call, he added one more thing. Mrs. Brooks, I strongly recommend that you speak to a legal advisor before making any official statements. I will. After the call ended, I sat quietly at the kitchen table again, my phone still in my hand, the house still silent. But my mind was clearer now, because for the first time all day, I understood the situation completely. Darnell had built a business deal around an insurance policy tied to my life. That policy helped secure more than $1 million in funding. Investors believed everything was legitimate. Banks believed the investment was protected. The insurance company believed I personally agreed to the policy. But none of that was true. The entire structure depended on one thing: my silence. If I stayed quiet, the system continued working. The policy remained active, the company kept its funding, the investor stayed confident. Everything continued exactly the way Darnell planned. But if I spoke up, if I told the truth about the forged signature, the entire structure could collapse. I leaned back slowly in the chair. For years, I believed silence was the safest choice in my marriage. Silence avoided arguments. Silence avoided embarrassment. Silence kept things calm. But now I understood something I hadn't before. Silence wasn't protecting me. Silence was protecting him. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Darnell. Pulling into the driveway. My heart skipped because the moment I'd been thinking about all afternoon had finally arrived. I looked around the kitchen, the laptop still open, the documents still spread across the table, evidence of everything I had learned that day. In a few seconds, the front door would open, Darnell would walk inside, probably smiling, probably expecting dinner, probably believing nothing had changed. But everything had, because now I knew about the policy, the forged signature, the investment, the company funding built around my life. And for the first time in years, I wasn't planning to stay silent. The sound of the garage door opening made my heart jump. For a moment, I just sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the documents spread out in front of me. The policy confirmation letter, the application with the forged signature, the business registration page, the notes I had written throughout the day, all of it laid out like pieces of a puzzle that finally made sense.
The front door opened. Darnell's footsteps came down the hallway. The familiar rhythm of them used to feel comforting. That evening, they felt different, heavy, like each step carried the weight of everything I had learned. "Elaine?" he called out. "In the kitchen," I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. He walked in a few seconds later, loosening his tie the way he always did when he got home. His eyes moved to the table immediately, the papers, the laptop, the legal pad. He frowned slightly. "What's all this?" I watched him carefully. For years I had become skilled at reading small expressions on his face, a raised eyebrow, a tightened jaw, the way his shoulders shifted when he was uncomfortable. Right now his expression wasn't alarmed, just curious, which meant he still didn't know what I knew. "I got a letter today," I said quietly. He set his keys on the counter. "What kind of letter?" "From an insurance company." That was when I saw the first real change in his expression. It was quick, almost invisible, but I saw it. His eyes flickered to the envelope on the table, just for a second, then back to me. "What insurance company?" he asked. "Horizon Life Assurance." The silence that followed lasted less than 2 seconds, but it told me everything, because the look that crossed his face wasn't confusion, it was recognition. He knew exactly what that company was. "What about it?" he said casually. I slid the policy confirmation across the table toward him. "Apparently, I've had a life insurance policy for the past 2 years. He picked up the paper slowly. His eyes moved across the page. I watched his face carefully as he read. Most people expect anger in moments like this, or panic, but Darnell wasn't the kind of man who showed either easily. He had always been calm, measured, controlled. That was part of what made his criticism so effective over the years. He never yelled, he just spoke quietly until I doubted myself. But now something in his posture had shifted, not fear, calculation. "So?" he said finally. "So?" I repeated. "Yeah, lots of people have life insurance." My chest tightened. "But they usually know about it." He shrugged. "I was going to tell you eventually." Eventually, that word landed heavily in the room. 2 years later, I asked. He leaned against the counter. "It's just financial planning." Financial planning, the same phrase he used every time I asked about money. But now the documents on the table made that explanation sound hollow. "I spoke with the insurance company today," I said quietly. His shoulders stiffened slightly, just for a moment, then he relaxed again. "Okay." "They sent me the application documents." I pushed the printed pages toward him. He glanced down at them. The forged signature sat clearly at the bottom of the form. "That's my name," I said. He nodded. "Yeah, that's not my signature." For the first time since he walked into the kitchen, he didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between us. I waited. He exhaled slowly and ran a hand over the back of his neck. "Elaine." The tone of his voice had changed, softer, almost patient, the same tone he used whenever he thought I was overreacting. "It's not a big deal." My chest tightened again. "Not a big deal? It's paperwork," he said. "You signed for me?" I asked. It was easier that way. Easier. That word echoed in my mind. He said it like it was completely reasonable, like signing someone else's name to an $850,000 life insurance policy was just a minor convenience. "You forged my signature," I said quietly. He sighed. "Don't make it sound like that." "How should I make it sound?" He rubbed his forehead. "You're getting emotional." That phrase, I had heard it so many times before. Every time I raised a concern, every time I questioned something he did, "You're getting emotional." as if my reaction was always the problem. But this time, something inside me stayed steady, calm, because the evidence was sitting right in front of us. This policy helped secure funding for your company. His head snapped up. How do you know that? I spoke with the compliance consultant. The silence that followed this time was much longer. His eyes narrowed slightly. You called Victor? Yes. I watched the calculation in his face, the quick mental adjustments, because suddenly the situation had changed. Now he knew I had information, real information. You shouldn't have done that, he said quietly. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Why? Because now you're creating problems. Problems. That word made something inside my chest finally snap into clarity. For years, avoiding problems had been my role in this marriage. Stay quiet, keep peace, don't ask questions. But now the truth was sitting in front of both of us, and the problem wasn't my questions. The problem was what he had done. Darnell, I said slowly. Yes. If that signature is forged, his expression tightened, then the entire funding structure for your company was built on false information. For the first time since he walked into the kitchen, I saw something real in his eyes. Not irritation, not patience, fear. Just for a second, but it was there. And in that moment, I realized something important. The life insurance policy wasn't just a secret he kept from me. It was the foundation of something much bigger, something he had never expected to discover. And now that I had, the entire structure he built might be about to collapse. For a moment after I said it, neither of us moved. The kitchen felt unusually still, like the house itself was holding its breath. Darnell stood by the counter, his hand resting on the edge like he needed something solid to lean against. His eyes were on the documents, not on me. That told me more than anything else he could have said. When someone is innocent, they look at you. When someone is calculating, they look at the evidence. You don't understand how this works, he said finally. His voice had that calm tone again, the one he used when he thought he was the smartest person in the room. Then explain it, I said. He straightened his shoulders. It's normal in business. Forging my name? It wasn't forging, he said quickly. It was procedural. Procedural. That word almost made me laugh. You signed my name to an $850,000 policy. It was necessary. For what? For the deal, he said. He said it like the answer should have been obvious, like the entire conversation we were having was unnecessary. The investors needed assurance, he continued. The insurance was just a safeguard. For them. Yes, not for me. For them. I noticed he didn't correct that part. My chest tightened. You know it's strange, right? I asked quietly. What? This letter arrived by accident. He frowned. What do you mean? It was a routine confirmation notice. His face went completely still, which means the company sent it automatically, which means if they hadn't. I let the sentence trail off because we both knew how it ended. If they hadn't sent that letter, I would still be sitting in this kitchen believing everything about my marriage was normal, still trusting him, still unaware that nearly $1 million had been quietly attached to my life. And the truth? He knew that. You should have just ignored it, he said quietly. That sentence hung in the air. Ignored it, like the discovery of a forged signature and an $850,000 life insurance policy was just an inconvenience. Like the problem wasn't what he did, the problem was that I noticed, and in that moment, something inside me finally settled into place. For years, I had believed silence kept me safe. Silence kept the peace. Silence kept our marriage intact. But tonight, I finally understood the difference between silence and survival. Silence protects the person doing the harm. Survival protects yourself. I looked at Darnell, really looked at him, at the man I had spent 15 years trying to keep happy, trying not to challenge, trying not to embarrass him, trying not to ask questions that might lead somewhere uncomfortable. He had counted on that, built an entire financial structure around it, and now he was still counting on it. "You think I won't say anything," I said quietly. He didn't answer, but his expression told me everything. He expected me to protect him, like I always had. I picked up the life insurance letter and folded it slowly. "You know it's strange, right?" "What?" "This letter arrived by accident." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "It was a routine confirmation notice." His face went completely still, "which means the company sent it automatically, which means if they hadn't—" I left the sentence trail off because we both knew how it ended. "If they hadn't sent that letter, I would still be sitting in this kitchen believing everything about my marriage was normal, still trusting him, still unaware that nearly $1 million had been quietly attached to my life. And the truth? He knew that. "You should have just ignored it," he said quietly. That sentence hung in the air. Ignored it, like the discovery of a forged signature and an $850,000 life insurance policy was just an inconvenience. Like the problem wasn't what he did, the problem was that I noticed. And in that moment, something inside me finally settled into place. For years, I had believed silence kept me safe. Silence kept the peace. Silence kept our marriage intact. But tonight, I finally understood the difference between silence and survival. Silence protects the person doing the harm. Survival protects yourself. I looked at Darnell, really looked at him, at the man I had spent 15 years trying to keep happy, trying not to challenge, trying not to embarrass him, trying not to ask questions that might lead somewhere uncomfortable. He had counted on that, built an entire financial structure around it, and now he was still counting on it. "You think I won't say anything," I said quietly. He didn't answer, but his expression told me everything. He expected me to protect him, like I always had. I picked up the life insurance letter and folded it slowly. "You know it's strange, right?" "What?" "This letter arrived by accident." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "It was a routine confirmation notice." His face went completely still. "Which means the company sent it automatically, which means if they hadn't—" I left the sentence trail off because we both knew how it ended. "If they hadn't sent that letter, I would still be sitting in this kitchen believing everything about my marriage was normal, still trusting him, still unaware that nearly $1 million had been quietly attached to my life. And the truth? He knew that. "You should have just ignored it," he said quietly. That sentence hung in the air. Ignored it, like the discovery of a forged signature and an $850,000 life insurance policy was just an inconvenience. Like the problem wasn't what he did, the problem was that I noticed. And in that moment, something inside me finally settled into place. For years, I had believed silence kept me safe. Silence kept the peace. Silence kept our marriage intact. But tonight, I finally understood the difference between silence and survival. Silence protects the person doing the harm. Survival protects yourself. I looked at Darnell, really looked at him, at the man I had spent 15 years trying to keep happy, trying not to challenge, trying not to embarrass him, trying not to ask questions that might lead somewhere uncomfortable. He had counted on that, built an entire financial structure around it, and now he was still counting on it. "You think I won't say anything," I said quietly. He didn't answer, but his expression told me everything. He expected me to protect him, like I always had. I picked up the life insurance letter and folded it slowly. "You know it's strange, right?" "What?" "This letter arrived by accident." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "It was a routine confirmation notice." His face went completely still. "Which means the company sent it automatically, which means if they hadn't—" I left the sentence trail off because we both knew how it ended. "If they hadn't sent that letter, I would still be sitting in this kitchen believing everything about my marriage was normal, still trusting him, still unaware that nearly $1 million had been quietly attached to my life. And the truth? He knew that. You should have just ignored it, he said quietly.
The kitchen stayed quiet after my last words. Darnell didn't argue. He didn't shout. He just stood there staring at the papers like they had betrayed him. For years, I believed confrontation would explode into chaos. I imagined shouting matches, slammed doors, ugly scenes that shattered the fragile peace of our house. But the truth was quieter than that. The end of something important often happens in silence. "I think you're making a mistake," he said finally. His voice sounded tired now. Not angry, not confident, just tired. "Maybe," I said, "but it won't be the first mistake in this house." He rubbed his forehead slowly. "You're going to destroy everything." Everything. That word echoed strangely in the room, because what he called everything had been built without me. The company, the investment, the policy, the funding, all of it existed in a world I wasn't invited into. Yet somehow my name had been placed at the center of it. My identity, my life, my signature, all used to support something I never agreed to. "You built something that depended on me staying silent," I said. "That's not my responsibility." He looked at me like he was trying to understand who I had suddenly become. But the truth was simple. I hadn't changed. I had just stopped shrinking. For 15 years, I convinced myself peace meant keeping quiet. If he criticized me, I stayed quiet. If something didn't feel right, I stayed quiet. If money moved without explanation, I stayed quiet. Silence became a habit, but habits can break. Sometimes they break because of something dramatic. Other times they break because of something small, like a plain white envelope sitting in a stack of junk mail. "I'm not trying to ruin your life," I said calmly. "I'm correcting the truth." He didn't answer because he understood exactly what that meant. Correcting the truth meant the insurance company would review the policy. Correcting the truth meant investors would question the funding structure. Correcting the truth meant his explanation about the forged signature would have to exist somewhere outside our kitchen, in offices, in documents, in investigations, places where quiet wives don't exist, only facts. I gathered the papers slowly and placed them into a folder. The motion felt steady, deliberate, the opposite of the shaking fear I felt earlier that morning, because now everything was clear. I wasn't reacting emotionally, I was responding logically. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. I looked at him. "I already have." That was the part he hadn't understood yet. The moment I called the insurance company, the moment I spoke to the compliance consultant, the moment I started asking questions, the silence had already ended. There was no going back. He leaned back against the counter again, staring at the floor. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a place where I had to be careful with my words. It felt like a place where truth could exist. And that truth wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simple. A life insurance policy existed in my name without my permission. A signature had been forged. A business investment had used that policy to secure funding. And the people involved believed I had agreed to it. All I was doing now was correcting the record. I walked to the sink and turned on the water again. The same dishes I had left unfinished that morning were still there. It felt strange how ordinary everything looked, how normal the kitchen appeared after a day that changed everything about my marriage. But maybe that was the point. Life rarely announces its turning points. Sometimes they arrive quietly, inside an envelope, inside a phone call, inside the moment when you realize the difference between silence and survival. I finished rinsing the last plate and turned off the faucet. When I looked up again, Darnell was still standing in the same place, the man I had spent 15 years trying not to upset, now facing the consequences of something he thought I would never discover. But this story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about clarity. Because once you see the truth clearly, you can't pretend it doesn't exist anymore. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't fighting loudly, it's simply refusing to stay invisible. If you learned something new from my life story, please like this video, subscribe to join our community for more stories like mine, and comment down below where you're watching this video from. I truly love to know.